Taylor, what do you think of the band name?
See, I thought it was really cool. I must be really a dipshit, but...
Taylor Hawkins was a heartbeat of Foo Fighters, a rock band carrying the legacy of Nirvana, of pain and rebirth. With his flowing blonde hair, mischievous eyes, and thunderous drumming, Taylor wasn't just a timekeeper. He was a fire, magnetic, wild, sometimes reckless, yet deeply tender to those he loved. On stage, he embodied a raw life force, but behind the scenes, he was a man who stumbled more than once, haunted by childhood traumas, shadowed by addiction, and weighed down by the loneliness of an artist's life and the pressure of being a performance machine that wasn't allowed to stop. His sudden death on the night of March 25, 2022, in Colombia, just an hour before showtime, didn't just bring the band to its knees. It left a gaping void in the hearts of fans around the world. But to understand why Taylor Hawkins was not just a gifted drummer but a symbol of an entire rock generation, we must retrace the path of his life, a solo filled with highs and lows, sometimes offbeat, but never lacking in passion, and one that still echoes in the memories of those who loved him. Taylor Hawkins was born on February 17, 1972, in Fort Worth, Texas, the youngest of 3 siblings. His family later moved to Laguna Beach, California, when he was just 5 years old, a beautiful coastal town, but one filled with invisible pressures. His father, the typical 1970s man, was quiet, tough, emotionally distant. In contrast, his mother, always loving and gentle, carried her own silent demons that every child in the household had to learn to live with. Taylor once said, "My mom had a dark side. When she passed out on the sofa from exhaustion, it was my sister Heather who cooked dinner and took care of everything." In his memory, his mother was the only one who truly believed in his musical potential. When he stood in the living room singing, dancing, pretending to perform, she was the sole audience member who clapped patiently. She was also the first to see his fascination with drums and believed he would go far. His father, on the other hand, showed little interest, not out of cruelty, perhaps, but because of the emotional reserve of a generation unaccustomed to open affection. That emotional gap is what drove Taylor to music as an escape. He once described himself as a fat, dumb kid who failed at everything, not good at school, not athletic, not socially popular. Everything changed when a neighbor let him bang on an old drum kit. Taylor was instantly hooked. The neighbor encouraged him, saying, "You were born to play drums." Not long after, a female friend's older brother went off to the military, leaving behind a pile of rock records. Among those dusty, corner-worn album sleeves, Taylor discovered news of The World by Queen, and his world shifted. He immersed himself in Roger Taylor's drumming and was swept away by the soundtracks of Star Wars, Superman, and the sweeping scores of John Williams. Big, dramatic, emotionally layered sounds he said he felt with his heart, not just heard with his ears. In high school, Taylor lived in 2 parallel worlds, surfing by day, playing music by night. He joined various cover bands and practiced drums by playing along to albums by Rush, Genesis, and The Police. While glam metal dominated the chart at the time, Taylor gravitated toward alternative rock, especially Jane's Addiction, whose raw, honest, rebellious sound made him feel like he finally belonged. No one could have predicted that this insecure boy who failed at nearly everything would find his voice through a pair of drumsticks. Few realized that it was precisely his quiet, complicated childhood that shaped him into an artist who burned with fire on stage yet remained deeply sensitive when the lights went down. After graduating high school, Taylor left Laguna Beach and moved to Venice, where he immersed himself in the gritty street music scene, a world where young artists weren't chasing fame, but seeking freedom through sound. There, he and his friends formed a band called Sylvia, inspired by Jane's Addiction, raw, unpolished, but brimming with hunger and instinct. One night, Sylvia performed at Club Laundry, a small venue in Los Angeles. In the sparse crowd was Stevie Solis, who happened to be looking for a drummer for Canadian singer Sass Jordan, who was about to open for Aerosmith's European tour. Solis wasn't impressed by the band as a whole, but he noticed a long-haired drummer with wild energy and undeniable presence. After the show, he said, "I need someone who understands punk and alternative, and that kid has something strange about him." At just 22, Taylor embarked on his first tour with Sass Jordan, and immediately became a standout on stage. His skills were still rough around the edges, but he shone with what Jordan described as a light and love radiating from within. She recalled, "I knew the moment he walked into the room. Some people draw you in like light down your spine. Taylor was one of them." During one opening gig for Steve Perry, the legendary frontman of Journey, Taylor caught the attention of Scott Welch, Perry's manager, who also worked with a rising artist named Alanis Morissette. At the time, Alanis had just completed her breakthrough album Jagged Little Pill and was looking for a drummer for her global tour. Taylor was quickly invited to audition and soon became an essential part of Alanis's live band alongside guitarist Chris Chaney. What followed was an explosive 2-year journey playing some of the biggest stages in the world. With his striking looks, windswept blonde hair, and showman-style drumming, Taylor stood out as much as a lead singer. He wasn't just a drummer. He was part of the soul behind fiery performances of You Ought to Know, Hand in My Pocket, and Ironic. When asked why he chose to play behind a solo artist, Taylor once said, "Because it was a real band, not just a show. Alanis let me be myself. I got to play music with my whole being." In 1995, during KROQ's almost acoustic Christmas event, Taylor met Dave Grohl for the first time. Foo Fighters and Alanis were both on the lineup that day. Taylor later said, "I was just a backup drummer kid, and Dave was a guy I idolized in Nirvana. But he was incredibly friendly. We smoked together, talked about Queen and the Police, and I just knew I had met someone who was going to change my life." No one could have predicted it at the time, but that moment marked the beginning of one of the deepest friendships in rock history and the start of a new chapter, where Taylor would no longer stand behind someone else's spotlight, but step forward as the official drummer of Foo Fighters. In 1997, when Dave Grohl called Taylor and asked if he knew any good drummers for Foo Fighters after William Goldsmith's departure, Taylor didn't hesitate. Yeah, I'll do it, he said. At the time, Foo Fighters was still an up-and-coming band, while Alanis had already conquered the world. But Taylor chose rock not for the money, but for the music that made him feel truly alive. His first show with Foo Fighters was a secret gig on April 19th, 1997, at the Alligator Lounge in Santa Monica. From there, he embarked on a journey with the band through every stage of their evolution, from media skepticism to electrifying stadium performances. The first album he contributed to was There's Nothing Left to Lose in 1999. Though he only played on part of it, it marked the beginning of a powerful dynamic with Grohl. By the early 2000s, Foo Fighters were breaking through. The album One by One, 2002, with hits like All My Life and Times Like These, marked a revival after near breakup. Taylor didn't just play drums. He co-wrote, arranged, and helped define the band's evolving sound. Foo Fighters went on to become one of the biggest rock bands in the world. Taylor Hawkins was a massive part of that rise. With his golden hair, explosive drumming, and stage presence, he was irreplaceable. But Taylor's artistry didn't stop there. He wrote his own songs, sang lead, played guitar, and founded Taylor Hawkins and the Coattail Riders in 2006, exploring a more humorous and inventive side of himself. Albums like Red Light Fever and Get the Money showcase his musical range. He joined side projects like Birds of Satan, NHC, and the cover band Chevy Metal, and frequently collaborated with legends like Elton John, Brian May, and Coheed and Cambria. He even swapped roles with Grohl at shows to sing lead. His renditions of Under Pressure, Somebody to Love, and Rock and Roll were showstoppers. Across nearly 25 years with Foo Fighters, from In Your Honor to Medicine at Midnight, 2021, Taylor infused every beat with unfiltered emotion. He never lost that garage band spirit. Music wasn't a job, it was the only way to be himself. But behind the high energy was a man wrestling with his own shadows. Taylor once joked that if he weren't drumming, he'd probably be delivering pizzas. It wasn't just humility, it reflected a deep-rooted uncertainty. He never saw himself as a rock god. He always felt like he was chasing something: fame, freedom, or maybe peace. That drive sometimes led him to dangerous places. In the late 1990s, as Foo Fighters' fame rose and the touring became relentless, Taylor struggled to keep pace. In 2001, after a show at the V Festival in the UK, he took a dose of heroin that proved too strong. By the next morning, he was in a coma. For those close to him, the memory still lingers like a nightmare. Dave Grohl, friend, bandmate, and leader, sat by Taylor Hawkins' hospital bed, waiting. For a moment, it felt like history was repeating itself. He had already lost Kurt Cobain, and now it seemed he might lose another brother. But Taylor woke up, and for the first time, he began to face himself. He didn't become a changed man overnight. He later admitted, "I loved doing drugs, but I lost control. I believe in the myth of live fast, die young, and I almost made it come true." Recovery came slowly, step by step. He quit smoking, started exercising, and became obsessed with mountain biking, a new kind of addiction, healthier but still revealing his constant need to fill a void. He grew more mindful of his health, spent more time with his family, and tried to live a more balanced life. But for an artist always running to the beat, too much stillness could also stir restlessness. In his 40s, Taylor began to worry about his physical limits. He confessed to having stage fright, not from the lights, but from his own body. "I'm not 25 anymore," he told Rolling Stone. "Every time I go on stage, I have to keep up with people 20 years younger. It's like fighting my own age." From 2018 onward, those around him began to notice changes. His longtime drum tech, nicknamed Yeti, recalled a period when Taylor lost a significant amount of weight, couldn't sleep, and looked completely drained. He ate irregularly, exercised less, and always seemed anxious. Though he never complained publicly, the changes showed in subtle ways: sunken eyes, a slower voice, and sometimes a silence between the laughter. By late 2021, Foo Fighters returned to post-COVID touring with a packed schedule. One night on a plane, Taylor passed out and had to be revived with full fluids. He didn't appear at the Abu Dhabi show, and according to Chad Smith of Red Hot Chili Peppers, that was the moment Taylor truly confronted the ultimate boundary, his health. Soon after, close friends say he had a private conversation with Dave Grohl and the band's management, requesting a lighter tour schedule. "I can't keep up this pace anymore," he said. "We need to figure something out." The Foo Fighters camp denied any formal requests. Everyone either stayed silent or framed it as a personal reflection, not an official ask. What mattered was that despite the fatigue, Taylor never stopped trying. In early 2022, he excitedly told Yeti, "I've hired a trainer. I'm working hard. I've gained 15 pounds. I'm finally doing it right." Those closest to him believed Taylor truly wanted to get back on track, to stay healthy, to restore balance. But sometimes recovery arrives slower than the body allows. And Taylor Hawkins, though he had walked through darkness, still carried scars. Scars not visible to the eye, but never erased. Even amid the thunder of his drums, he was an artist who lived with heartbreaking honesty, and like so many in that world, the price of truth is often the hardest to predict. Taylor Hawkins was never the kind of artist who put his private life on display. He wasn't caught in romantic scandals, didn't cross over into media circuits, and rarely shared personal stories on talk shows. But to those who knew him well, Taylor was a deeply affectionate man, fiercely loyal to his family, and someone who lived with a simplicity that seemed almost surprising given the spotlight he had stepped into. In 2005, during a peak in his career with Foo Fighters, Taylor married Allison, the woman who stood by his side for more than 17 years. They weren't a red carpet couple, but in every chapter of his journey, from the stage to behind the scenes, Allison was there. Together they had 3 children, including their daughter Annabelle, who directly inspired the song Middle, featured on Taylor's solo album Get the Money. In it, he explored some of the most intimate facets of being a suburban dad. Get the Money wasn't just a fun side project. It was a brief but heartfelt declaration. Taylor wasn't only the drummer in a legendary rock band. He was a man who drove his kids to school, spent evenings playing guitar in the garage, and occasionally drummed with friends and cover bands at local events. He once said, "I know I'll never be Freddie Mercury or Dave Grohl, but I can be a good dad, a funny husband, and a nice neighbor. That's enough for me." When not on tour, Taylor lived in Topanga Canyon, a quiet, wooded area in California where the air smelled of pine and the hills rolled endlessly. There, he built a small home studio, working independently, jamming with friends, writing, recording, sometimes just for fun. Neighbors described him as cheerful, often seen biking in the mornings, greeting everyone, never acting like a rock star. Yet, as a sensitive artist, Taylor carried his share of insecurities. In one rare interview, he confessed to feeling overwhelmed by his role. "People see me on stage and think I'm confident, in control. But a lot of times, I just want to go home, sit with my daughter, and watch cartoons. Taylor loved his wife, his kids, and his fans. In his own quiet way, he was known for always signing autographs, never refusing a photo, and most importantly, never taking fan love for granted. One now famous story before his passing involved a 9-year-old girl named Emma Sophia, who brought her toy drum kit outside his hotel and played for her idol. Taylor didn't just come down to take a picture. He spent time talking with her, encouraging her, and gave what many described as the warmest smile of the day. Emma's parents recalled, it was supposed to be her worst day, and Taylor made it her best. He didn't need big stages or flashy awards to be remembered. Taylor Hawkins left a mark not just because he played drums brilliantly, but because he lived among others as if music was something real, simple, and capable of touching hearts, with a kind word, a pat on the back, or a hug for his daughter in the middle of the night. He didn't need a medal to prove he was a good father, because those who live from the heart never have to prove it at all. As he entered his 50s, Taylor Hawkins was no longer the fiery young man sprinting across the stage, hair flying in the wind. He still radiated an astonishing life force and still made audiences rise to their feet the moment his drums kicked in. But inside, his body and mind had begun sending out distress signals. After the COVID-19 pandemic, as Foo Fighters returned with the album Medicine at Midnight and the horror comedy film Studio 666, Taylor felt more conflicted than ever. On one hand, he wanted to keep going. Music was his life. But on the other, the relentless schedule was draining him, physically and mentally. He admitted to having stage fright, no longer feeling as confident as before. I'm not the 25-year-old kid anymore. Every show feels like a race. I'm just trying to survive. In late 2021, on a flight to Abu Dhabi, Taylor lost consciousness and had to be revived with full fluids. The show was canceled. That incident felt like a warning. According to Chad Smith, drummer for Red Hot Chili Peppers, Taylor had a serious conversation with Dave Grohl and the band's management, candidly saying, I can't keep doing this. We need to make adjustments. That's what Taylor Hawkins told Dave Grohl and Foo Fighters management in a candid moment, a rare pause in the storm of their relentless touring life. As he entered his 50s, Taylor was no longer the fiery young man sprinting across the stage, hair flying in the wind. He still radiated an astonishing life force, still made audiences rise to their feet the moment his drums kicked in, but inside, his body and mind had begun sending distress signals. After the COVID-19 pandemic, as the Foo Fighters returned with their album Medicine at Midnight and the horror comedy film Studio 666, Taylor felt more conflicted than ever. On one hand, he wanted to keep going. Music was his life. But on the other, the unending schedule was draining him, physically and mentally. He admitted to having stage fright, no longer feeling as confident. I'm not the 25-year-old kid anymore. Every show feels like a race. I'm just trying to survive, he told Rolling Stone. In late 2021, on a flight to Abu Dhabi, Taylor lost consciousness and had to be revived with full fluids. The show was canceled. That incident felt like a warning. According to Chad Smith of Red Hot Chili Peppers, Taylor had a serious conversation with Grohl and the band's management shortly after, repeating his plea, I can't keep doing this. We need to make adjustments. But on March 25th, 2022, at 7:40 p.m., an ambulance arrived at his hotel in Bogota. Paramedics attempted CPR, but Taylor Hawkins was already gone. No more drumming. No more mischievous smile. No more sparkling eyes beneath that long blonde hair. He died on the spot at the age of 50. The band announced the heartbreaking news at 9:59 p.m., just minutes after fans had learned that the show would not go on. The stage fell silent. The music stopped. Only candles and tears remained. When news of Taylor Hawkins' death spread that evening, it stunned not only the rock world, but the entire globe. At the Estéreo Picnic Festival stage in Bogota, thousands still waited, unaware that the band's heartbeat had just stopped beating. Instead of the thunderous opening of Everlong, there were only whispers, then choked sobs. The stage became a memorial. Candles lit the night. Fans wept openly, and the silence was louder than any encore. Foo Fighters immediately canceled the remainder of their South American tour. In a brief but crushing statement, they said, the Foo Fighters family is devastated by the sudden and tragic loss of our beloved brother Taylor Hawkins. His laughter and musical spirit will live on with us forever. The tributes poured in. Ozzy Osbourne called Taylor a wonderful person and an extraordinary musician. Travis Barker said, "I don't know what to write. Saying I miss him isn't enough. See you again. We'll talk drums and smoke in the dressing room." Billie Eilish wore a shirt with Taylor's face at the Grammys. Miley Cyrus, who stepped in for Foo Fighters at Lollapalooza, Brazil, dedicated her set to him, breaking down in tears. Roger Taylor, Taylor's lifelong idol, shared a photo with his son Rufus, Taylor's protege, and wrote a farewell laced with heartbreak. Jimmy Page recalled Taylor's radiant innocence, his technique, and his fire. But the grief soon gave way to questions. Taylor Hawkins had faced death before, falling into a 2-week coma in London in 2001 from a drug overdose. Since then, he had worked to stay healthy, training like an endurance athlete and undergoing regular checkups. Just months before his passing, he told Rolling Stone, "I just had a full checkup. The doctor said I'm in great shape. My heart's big because I train hard." So what happened? A Colombian forensic report revealed Taylor's heart weighed 600 grams, nearly double the average. A urine test showed traces of over 10 substances: opioids, tricyclic antidepressants, benzodiazepines, THC, and more. Some reports mentioned a cocaine-like substance in the room, though this was later left out of the official prosecutor's statement. The ambiguity deepened the unease. In May 2022, Rolling Stone published an investigative article in which close friends like Matt Cameron and Chad Smith said Taylor had told him the tour schedule was destroying him. "I can't take it anymore," he had said. "This schedule is killing me." But days later, both friends walked back their statements, saying their words had been misrepresented. The Foo Fighters camp stayed silent, which only fueled speculation. Some fans believe it was a tragic accident, a once-addicted artist whose body had worn down. Others believe Taylor tried to speak up, but was ignored in the machine of entertainment. Then, a final voicemail surfaced, left by Taylor for his close friends, the Ferrells. "Take care of each other, okay? I'll take care of myself. See you in Sao Paulo. I love you guys." It wasn't a goodbye. It was a promise, one he couldn't keep. Taylor Hawkins' death remains a question without an answer. All we know is a man who once beamed behind his drum kit, who signed autograph for a 9-year-old girl in Paraguay, who wrote songs for his daughter, quietly fell just before showtime. Perhaps he was exhausted. Perhaps he was still trying. And perhaps, in his final moments, he still believed the show would go on. And that, perhaps, is the most tragic truth of all. Taylor Hawkins never sought titles. He didn't demand spotlight. But when people speak of the greatest drummers of the modern era, John Bonham, Neil Peart, Roger Taylor, his name now often appears among them. Not because of superhuman skill, but because of the wild, sincere spirit he poured into every strike of the drumstick. He wasn't just Foo Fighters' timekeeper. He was their second heartbeat. If Grohl was a brain and soul, then Taylor was a fire, the pulse, the joy. Every performance carried a piece of himself, his heart, his humor, his unshakable spark. Beyond Foo Fighters, he was frontman of Taylor Hawkins and the Coattail Riders, where he showcased vocals, songwriting, and sheer presence. His 2019 album Get the Money reflected a playful, introspective spirit, a man grounded in family, love, and rebellion. He played with Alanis Morissette / Brian May and Elton John. He was a bridge between generations, idolized legends, mentored newcomers, and connected with every fan along the way. But perhaps Taylor's greatest legacy isn't on charts or in record books. It lives in how he made people feel, inspired, alive, understood. He was once a fat, dumb kid who thought he'd never amount to anything, until he picked up a pair of drumsticks. He lived fast, loved hard, made mistakes, and hugged young fans like family. He didn't build monuments, but left lasting footprints in hearts, in music, in memory. And like a drum solo, brief, maybe cut short, but played with every ounce of soul, he'll never fade. Taylor Hawkins didn't vanish like a star dimming in the sky. He left like the final thunderous strike in a rock song that ended too soon. He once said, "I don't want to preach about not doing drugs because I loved them, but I lost control, and it almost killed me." It was a confession raw, unfiltered, and real. Just like Taylor. He loved music like a child, loved his family like a devoted father, loved his fans like old friends. And he left this world the same way he lived, without warning, without spectacle, but leaving behind a void no one can ever fill. Over 2 decades of music, personal albums, drum solos, and tender voice messages are now memories, but not sad ones. Rather, reminders that some people don't need a century to be remembered forever. If you've ever drummed along to a Foo Fighters song, smiled at Taylor's wild energy, or felt your throat tighten watching his final days, then maybe you understand. Taylor Hawkins wasn't just a drummer. He was the heartbeat of an era. Share your favorite memory of Taylor Hawkins in the comments. And if you believe artists like him should be remembered forever, like, subscribe, and ring the bell so we can keep these stories alive.